Hello, everyone. I am Northern Westman, and you're listening to the Disciple Hour, episode 26. Today, I am joined by Ian. Say hello, buddy.
Hey there, this is Ian.
And today, we'll be discussing two topics. Number one, the topic of offending the little ones. And topic number two, lying to protect the innocent. So the first topic, on offending the little ones. This is quoting Matthew 18:6. And it talks about whoever shall, quote unquote, offend the little ones will be punished severely on Judgment Day, apparently. And we will dive into it. So first of all, we need to understand what it actually means. I'll just read the entire verse here. Again, this is Matthew 18:6, King James Bible. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. So first of all, what does this mean? Some think it means harming children, such as pedophilia or child sacrifice, or perhaps something else, psychological torture. Or does it mean to lead children away from Christ? Or is it metaphorical? And Ian, you had some interesting perspective on this.
Yeah, if you look at the whole context of the passage, he's talking about how children, if we really want to be saved, we need to become like the little children in terms of how our approach to faith is. We need to have a faith that's very simple and devoted, because if you think about a child, children, they don't have as many hang-ups about things. They're more, I suppose some cynical person might say gullible, but they're also more trusting. And so, when someone good comes along to lead them, they trust that person without being suspicious, without questioning it every which way. And I think Jesus is calling us to be like the children and to trust him and have faith, even when everything's not always logical per se by the standards of adults, by the standards we would use in our regular lives. That we just have to have faith and not have everything carefully measured and whatnot. Like he says, if you can have a faith like that, then that's how you can truly be on the right path and to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And I think there's another aspect of it, that there's humility. Like, children don't, they're not really pretentious. They don't they don't go around thinking they're better than everyone, because on some level they know that they're children, and that everyone around them is bigger and older and presumably knows better. So I mean, it takes humility to have the faith of a child, and that's what Jesus is calling us to. So if you look at this passage, I mean, you could ask, when he says, whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, is he talking? He could be not just talking about children per se, but any believer who has a childlike faith, anyone who causes that person to sin is doing a great act of evil, which means it would be better for him to die than for him to do something like that, because it's corrupting something pure and good, and that's how severely Jesus views leading one astray.
That is an interesting perspective. I had not really thought of it that way. I had always seen this as children, because it is when you think about it, it's really sick to tell a child that believes in Jesus that, oh, Jesus doesn't exist or whatever, and possibly causing the child to just stop being a Christian and thus not being able to go to heaven eventually. And you can understand, if that is the case here, if that's what the verse means, is talking about, then surely Jesus would be very angry with such people who would just lead children away from him. But I guess you're right that it can be applied to basically anyone who is innocent, the good ones who are not living in sin. I have one example. A teenage girl in my congregation was approached by a bit of a harlotty girl who showed her inappropriate photos of some guy topless, and was just asking her inappropriate questions about him and so on. And what she was really doing was, this girl, this teen in my congregation, she is not living in sin. She's being holy. And so what this girl who was sinful was doing is she was really trying to make the clean one dirty. And that's the nature of sin. It spreads. I've seen this many times. Whoever sinneth, he is a slave to sin. If you sin, you are effectively a slave to it. That's just the nature of the sin. It's like this mud that just filthies your white linen robe, right? That's a good metaphor. And you can sort of see that concept in this chapter, in this context here. The sinful trying to make the holy ones dirty, trying to spread the sin onto them. And the punishment for them is simply going to be out of this world. If you're trying to make the holy ones fall, then you're basically just acting like Satan. So it's a very interesting perspective. But yeah, please go on.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm just saying it's true. It does seem there are some people in this world who really enjoy, seeing people sin, because they have this sort of resentment toward people who are living, or at least trying to live a holy life. So like, when they see somebody who, proclaims to be moral get caught in sin, they just kind of gleefully laugh about it, like, haha, see, we knew he wasn't any better than anyone else. We knew he was a bad guy all along. And it makes them feel better about themselves, because they figure like, well, hey, at least I'm not going around telling people not to do this. Like, it's not because they have any principles, but because somebody else doesn't live up to his principles perfectly. That's one of those traps they try to set for people, like, well, no one's perfect, so who are you to tell me that I shouldn't do this or that? And I have seen cases where there are people who really seem to delight in watching good people get corrupted. And I remember, and there is something about that just like naturally disgusts me. It's like, even if you aren't perfect, can't you at least admire it in somebody else, that somebody else is trying to live a better life or a cleaner life? But I really think there's just people out there who are evil and who enjoy that. So, I mean, Jesus is warning us here about those people, that those people are out there. And even in the next verse, in verse 7, he says, woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. In other words, it sounds like he's saying, people will come along to try and lead you astray, but woe to the man who does it. So don't be that guy who leads others astray. Don't be that person, because one of Jesus' main messages is we need to cut sin out of our lives. We need to go and sin no more. And he's pretty clear on that throughout his whole ministry. So if you're out there deliberately tripping people up, then you're doing far worse than the person you're tripping up, because you're bringing others down and you're leading people away from the truth.
Amen to that.
And it's
Yeah, it
that's a
is.
subject. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it is truly sickening that some people delight in others, falling to sin. It is really disgusting. I agree with you. It really sickens me to my stomach, especially teenagers. I mean, how horrible do you have to be? And I mean, this is just the nature of sin. I know that this word sin, gets thrown around in media. It's mocked, oh, sinful. Oh, what is a sin? And when you think of someone scolding someone for living in sin, you think of the Hollywood villain, the white male preacher screaming about sin, but is a total hypocrite. What am I saying? Hypocrite. Yeah, hypocrite. And living in total sin, but still, I mean, just throw the anti-white narrative in the trash can for a moment and just admit it. This sin, whatever severs your bond with God, your relationship with God, that is sin, and it is fundamentally evil. All the problems in the world, really, they stem from sin. They do. And one particular sin that we are going to discuss, that's our next topic, the sin of lying, or rather just living as a liar, the noun liar, because there are some instances in the Bible where it does seem that lying in order to protect the innocent is permissible. And we will cover that here. So that's the second topic, and this is a fine bridge onto it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read to you.
Go ahead.
I'm going to read to you a few snippets from verses in the Old Testament, mainly 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 19:17. Michal, the daughter of Saul, deceives her father Saul so that David, not yet king, can escape. The purpose here is to protect an innocent person. 1 Samuel 21:2. David deceives Ahimelech, the priest at Nob. The purpose is to protect Ahimelech from knowingly helping a fugitive from the king. But Ahimelech ended up being killed anyway. 1 Samuel 21:10-15. David feigns madness before Achish, king of Gath. The purpose was to protect himself from being killed by his nation's enemies, the Philistines. And 1 Samuel 27:10. David deceives Achish concerning where he had raided. And it isn't clear that this involves either war or protecting the innocent. And 1 Samuel 28:12, Saul deceives the witch of Endor as to his true identity. But I believe Saul was pretty much evil at that point.
Yeah, that was.
Now, these are just some
trying to get away from David, and he was he didn't tell the witch of Endor that he was Saul the king. He was consorting with a sorceress. So, it was what he was doing there was definitely not done righteously.
Right. And we see it, David, we see him lie in order to protect either himself or others, innocent. And yet he had the heart of God. Or a heart that was good in the eyes of God, whatever. And but it's still, we have to talk about Revelation 21:8, which says that all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire, amongst other things, idolaters, adulterers, murderers, etc. But it does mention all liars. So what makes you a liar then? Was David a liar? He did lie, but does it make him a liar? I think if you're lying in order to enrich yourself, in order to somehow benefit yourself, and deceiving others for gains and which harms other people, then that is truly sinful. But if you lie to protect yourself or others, then according to these verses here in 1 Samuel, it doesn't seem to be sinful. Did you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the concept of are we protecting the innocent or are we doing it for personal gain? I mean, if you defraud somebody out of their property or something like that, that's definitely sinful because it's using untruth for personal gain, like you said. But I mean, if you're trying to protect the innocent from harm, I mean, I don't think God's going to call that a lie. It's simply an untruth. But I think that it doesn't seem that the way the Bible uses the term lie or liars is in the context of simply saying something that's not true. I mean, you could argue that from that perspective, I mean, you could argue that just like acting out a story or something is lying because you're portraying a fictional character or something, that's lying because it's saying something that isn't true, but it's not lying. It's, I mean, even Jesus' parables, I mean, you could argue these were just metaphorical tales. They weren't literally true, but they were there to illustrate something. So I mean, he wasn't lying. He was just using something that wasn't technically true to demonstrate a principle. So I don't think that untruth is necessarily lying. It's only becomes lying and therefore a sin when you're doing it for base reasons, for personal gain, or to harm the innocent, or to when it's in service to other acts of evil.
Yes.
So I guess that's how I get it.
I do have to mention one thing. God, he doesn't lie. He is the truth, and so therefore he can't lie. And we are supposed to emulate Jesus as much as possible. And I have felt it that I don't want to lie. I don't want to lie to people on a daily basis. I mean, obviously, why would you? But I had this bad tendency to lie. Like we call it white lies. It's like lies like, oh yeah, the food is very good, when it's actually not. I mean, you don't want to upset the person, or someone asks you, how do you like my sweater? And you don't really like it. Do you just say, oh, it's terrible? Or do you lie like, oh yeah, it looks good on you? It's we want to be nice. You want to be nice. But I suppose in those instances, I don't know.
Well, I guess my thought of that is that it's contextual. Like, I mean, what's your relationship to the person? Like, if you're in a social gathering and the person says, "What do you think of the food?" You might say, "Oh, it's all right." I mean, that's that's so you don't start a fight in a social situation, which isn't necessary and could be kind of rude. I don't think that necessarily hurts anyone, but if you're in a situation where the person is, trying to become a better cook and they want you to give them honest feedback about their food, then and you say, "Oh, it's good," when actually it's terrible, and you're actually kind of harming them because they're trusting your judgment to as inspiration for what they're trying to do. So I mean, I think in that case you're actually deceiving them in a way that you could say is actually harmful to them. And same thing with like do you like my sweater or whatever? I mean, that's are you just trying to, are you in a casual social situation where it's not really of any consequence, or, is this person getting ready to go on a big date and wants to know how they look? I mean, the person looks terrible and you say, oh yeah, you look great, then you could be setting that person up for failure. So, I mean, in that case, you might actually be harming the person by not telling the truth. So I guess in my mind, that would be sort of contextual.
That's a fair point. I concede. But
Yeah.
however,
I mean, it's a good question.
what if you're like, okay, let's say that you are you hit the gym and you're, I don't know, just bench pressing 70 kilograms, but you lie and say, oh yeah, I'm taking 90 and I'll be getting to 100 in a couple of weeks. This is a lie. Will you go to hell for it? I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, look, this is like this is deceiving another person. So yeah, it is sinful. Like you should repent of that behavior. And I have tried to stop lying. I used to have this tendency to like exaggerate things. Even exaggerations, they are lies. Let's just be frank. And even I think Dale Carnegie teaches exaggerations to some limit. I might be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, if you know. But I don't want to exaggerate anymore because it is a lie, and I want to be like Jesus, and so I don't want to lie. Therefore, what is your take on that?
I mean, yeah, if you're in the habit of regularly exaggerating things, you might say, well, it's just a minor exaggeration. It doesn't really hurt anybody. But I think it kind of puts your mind in a bad place where it kind of causes you to devalue the truth in your daily life. So, I mean, if you add an extra 20 kilograms to your bench press, I mean, you might say that's not of any real consequence to anyone but you. But like, I mean, it's still causing you mentally to disregard the truth. So I think it's definitely a bad habit to do things like that because it can lead to bigger lies down the road. So that's just how I would view that. Whether that rises to the level of a sin, that's a tough call. But like, because maybe you're not necessarily like affecting anybody else by exaggerating your accomplishments, but it's still not a good thing to do.
Fair take. Now we have to talk about the 9th commandment, bearing a false witness against your neighbor. Now, obviously, you can understand why this is a commandment. Lying, to bear a false witness, making up a lie against someone, that is terrible. And that can only lead to evil. There can no good come out of this lie, right? And this is specifically a commandment given to Moses. We see this actually a lot of the time, to bear a false witness against your neighbor. But people even do it without realizing it. Now, this may sound like a propaganda, but really just think about it. The anti-white narrative is nothing but just pure lies and just gross exaggerations and bearing a false witness against an entire nation. And many Christians, sadly, they partake in it. What is your take on this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at how anti-whites behave, they're definitely not people who are concerned with the truth. They're concerned with personal gain at the expense of whoever that may be. So, I mean, these are not honest people. These are not people motivated by, truth and justice, because if they were, they would actually try to hear both sides of the story, and they would actually try to consider something that's fair to both parties. But like, this is something I often say about, like, people use terms like, justice. They use terms like reckoning, and it's like, do you actually understand what justice is? Do you know what reckoning is? It's where you actually sit down and work out like who owes who what, and then come to some sort of conclusion of how this debt or whatever it may be can be reconciled. Like that's actual justice. That's actual reckoning. Like what is fair to everybody involved. But so many people use these terms as if it's just like a blank check to demand whatever they want, to destroy whatever they want, to be entitled to whatever they want, and in all perpetuity. So no honest person operates that way. That you owe me forever and the rest and always until there's nothing left to take. I mean, that's not fair to both parties involved. That's completely one-sided. It's completely unfair. And yeah, it's just based in lying for personal gain. So yeah, that's absolutely sinful to perpetuate the anti-white narrative.
There's one thing that I'm particularly thinking of here. The notion that Europeans stole all the wealth from Africa. Now, this is a lie, and if you don't understand why, then I'm afraid to tell you, you do not understand economics and how wealth is created. The Europeans, they had ships to sail to Africa. They had the infrastructure in Europe to create those ships. They had a workforce, they had engineers, they had creators, talented smiths, carpenters, metallurgists, accent.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Metallurgy. Yeah. You get my point. Like, we had creators and we created these ships and all the wealth. Then we went to Africa, where the people had been roaming about the land for thousands of years without ever using the resources like we did. And we had, the Europeans, they had a demand for certain materials found in Africa in abundance. The Africans had, well, very little or even no demand for some of these resources, but they were sitting on the supply, and so they were happy to trade it for jewelry, guns. It's known that Europeans sold them guns, and they then went inland into and brought in slaves, but that's another story. There is one story that I'm thinking of. A pastor in my congregation held a sermon where he was talking about fake wealth, and he was talking about spiritually, but he made this analogy where he was talking about how Europeans had sold the Africans glass pearls. Actually, I did a internet search on it, but the way it was translated was glass pearls for oil. They traded glass pearls for oil, or at least some resource. And I mean, this is playing into the anti-white narrative. And did this guy even realize, I mean, is this true? I went and I Googled it and searched online for glass pearls. But the only thing that I came across was glass beads, that the Europeans sold the Africans glass beads and potentially for oil. But those glass beads were actually just jewelry, necklaces, etc. According to what I found. When I heard glass pearls, I just thought, like glass balls, like tiny balls made of glass that the Africans wanted. And I was just sitting there listening to the sermon thinking, this can't be true, because I would have heard of it. Like I am, me and you, we are delving into this anti-white narrative and refuting it. I would have heard this story, and I had never heard of it. And so when I did some digging, it turned out, according to what I found, Europeans did sell Africans jewelry beads made of like some of this was like polished rocks, some of it maybe amber, or some of it even just colored glass, who knows. But it was jewelry, and the Africans wanted it. They traded it. It was a fair trade. There was demand for it in Africa, and the Europeans wanted resources instead, which the Africans were not utilizing the same way as Europeans, and thus there was far lower demand for it in Africa. So it was fair trade at the time. I mean, now they trade oil for dollars, right? And I mean, this is an example of bearing a false witness against your neighbor without even realizing it. You were just regurgitating some story that you heard. And but it does say somewhere in Luke, I can't remember the chapter, that if you transgress without realizing it, the punishment will not be as severe. So thankfully, of course, God is just. But I would like to ask people who are listening to give it a thought. When you hear a story and you are about to regurgitate it in some conversation, please think about it. Is it true? Are you potentially bearing a false witness? Are you possibly spreading a lie? Because these lies are really harmful. It's destroying our civilization. That's how harmful it is. So please take it into account.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things inside the anti-white narrative. They don't give you the full context, or they don't really think about things other than they don't look outside how we would perceive it today and look at the context of the time. I mean, like you said, if the Africans had no use for oil, if they don't have any, internal combustion engines or anything that runs on oil, then they don't really need it. So it's not of any real value to them. But if the Europeans did, then it's a fair trade if they're willing to accept it. I mean, someone once said, value does not exist in the Platonic realm. It's relative to what your needs are. It's like the analogy I heard is like, if you've been walking through the desert and you're really dehydrated, somebody says, I can give you $1 million, or I can give you a glass of water. Well, $1 million isn't going to do you any good if you're about to die. A glass of water, though, that's more valuable to you in that moment. So, yeah, it's just value is relative to the situation. So it's not necessarily unfair. Now, if they did that today, and like that might be a different story, because then in a way you are defrauding them of something that they might have the infrastructure to make use of. But contextually, it's a different. The thing you describe is a different story. And I mean, it's the same way when we talk about conflicts between various groups. I mean, you hear like, oh, the Europeans, they killed this group of people, or they attacked this group of people. And, I'm not necessarily claiming that all instances of that are just or godly. I mean, we European peoples are sinners just like any other peoples are. But I mean, there are times when self-defense was involved. There's times when, they're living in a very brutal environment, such as like, I guess what comes to mind is like, you talk about the settlers of America. I mean, people act like, oh, they just came here and started killing off all the Indians. Well, that's not true. The Indians massacred Europeans all the time, and they did it in very gruesome ways, which, we don't need to get into the specifics here, but if you're curious and you have the stomach for it, you can look up what kind of awful things the Indians would do to white people. So, I mean, it's not like the Indians were just this poor, put upon little group that was completely innocent and the big bad Europeans came and just started killing them. I mean, there really was a conflict between two groups that just couldn't get along. So, I mean, this whole, to frame everything in a one-sided fashion to demonize Western kind is really, frankly, dishonest. And so, again, it's these lies that undermine the very, legitimacy of our civilization in the minds of many people. So that's not helping anybody to lie about these things.
Very true. And also regarding the Indians or the American Indians, there's this lie spreading and has been for quite a while that Europeans, or rather the French, had taught the Indians how to head sculpt. Now, when have the French head sculpt other Europeans? The French, and this is not me spreading mimetic pathogens, but the French have been waging a lot of wars in Europe and have been very successful, especially under Napoleon. But anyway, there are no records that I'm aware of the French head sculpting each other in civil wars, etc., and other Europeans in warfare. And so, but there are apparently stories of American Indians head sculpting each other and also Europeans. So it's almost just obvious that the head sculpting didn't come from the French, and you can fill in the blank because the ear is against the door. So this is an example of spreading lies and bearing a false witness against your neighbor, against the entire French nation and also Western kind in general. And another very sinister lie is that anyone can create Western civilization, even though you only find Western civilization where you find white people. And where you formerly found Western civilization, such as in Detroit, you don't find Western civilization in Detroit anymore because it's been white erased. And you find Western civilization in the wilderness where white people move in. So this is kind of obvious, but people are not willing to admit the truth, and so they're willing to bear a false witness. This is bearing false witness. They're saying that our civilization is not our own. It's really stealing, and B, it is bearing a false witness against us as a people, an entire nation. So keep this in mind, folks. But I think we have covered all of our topics, and this has been a wonderful discussion. And I thank you all for listening, and I thank you, Ian, unless you have final thoughts.
No, I don't think I have anything else to add. It's been good.
All righty. Well, thank you all for listening. God bless you all. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye-bye.